straight into the thing. The shirt that I'm wearing is a Star Trek related shirt. This is the commander from the Deep Space Nine station, Benjamin Sisko, and I think he was a baseball guy. And so this is I'm not too familiar with Deep Space Nine, um, but apparently he was a baseball player, and he used to go to the holodeck to play baseball, and that's his jersey.
Oh,
So
well,
in
do
the
we know what team he played for? Because that's pretty important.
I don't know, maybe he made up his own team. It's the holodeck after all. You
Mm,
can do anything you
maybe.
want. It's
Yeah.
like your world, your imagination.
Kind of like here.
We don't know if that's our world, our imagination, or if it's one platform dictating what we are allowed to imagine. Okay, I'm I'm streaming. I'll do a little intro. Um,
Share the mushrooms. That's all I can say. Share the mushrooms.
I don't have any in my possession, officer.
Ah,
Um,
okay. All right.
welcome Twitch, welcome
No,
Periscope,
it's pretty ethereal, though.
Ethereal. Um, sorry. Okay, focus. Um, hello there, dear viewers. My name is Dr. Axter, and no, my name is Draxter, and
Dr. Exter.
that's what one noob said to me, and it's very funny actually. I never thought of it, and he meant it. He really thought that's my name. Um, but today
Yeah, it could be.
we're going to read Kafka, the Metamorphosis, and I'll do a quick biographical intro to Kafka, and then we're off to the races. But before that, I want to say hello to Daisy and Shyla, and let's see if somebody else drops in. If not, that's perfectly fine. Welcome. How are you guys doing?
I'm happy snappy,
Good.
as ever.
The Shyla, you doing okay?
Well, I
The real world is pretty crazy these days.
yeah, the real, two shootings yesterday, two
Yep,
shootings in one
in
day in
one
my
day.
country.
Right. And before that,
And
Gilroy, where I lived very close to Gilroy for a long time.
I used to go to that festival. Did you ever go to
N-
that
uh,
festival?
Never go to this festival, but I love it so much. I used to love driving by Gilroy, smelling the garlic, and
Yeah.
yeah,
You roll down your windows. You go through Gilroy, you roll down your windows so you
right.
can smell the garlic. It doesn't matter how hot it is because it gets hot
And you know
in
that
Gilroy.
famous Snoop Doggy Dogg song, "Rolling down the streets, smelling garlic, sipping a."
It makes you think of Gilroy.
Yeah, yeah.
My heart goes out to everyone in Gilroy. My heart goes out to everyone in El Paso, to everyone in Ohio and Texas and California. To everyone. People in Florida, Colorado. How many states are going to be impacted by this
Yep.
before we actually say enough is enough?
It's one of those things
You know.
where the general public is, I think, in complete agreement of what they want, and that it shows it's another one of those examples of where the system is not working as intended because it's the discrepancy between what the public wants and what the
No, you know what? The system does in part work as intended. What was never intended, for instance, it was never intended for Congress people to have a salary. It was
good
never,
yeah.
these things were not intended. It was never intended to be a government for hire.
That's a good point. Although, and actually, I need to also uh, revise what I just said because a lot of people, as I'm reading up more and more on the history of the U.S. and the suppression of minorities and such like that. I mean, it's not directly related, although you could weave it into this narrative. There is a lot that was built, possibly the entire country, on suppression and on violence. And so this, I heard a few very interesting sort of editorials or essays about the connection between um, sort of this domestic terrorism, but also, everything else like the expansion of an empire or even or any empire for that matter is also based on violence. And I would like us to also, on top of discussing gun control and such, also really discuss the violence that is acceptable in, for example, a war situation, right? I think we need to take these things into account. I personally find it somewhat hypocritical when we, as human beings, say, okay, here's, you know, killing people is legitimate because of XYZ dictator XYZ needs to be destroyed, so let's do it. Um, and then these other things. I mean, weapons are for the killing. So again, this is not coming from a sort of a hippie, let's all get together, kumbaya, my lord, and we're all gonna get along type of uh, standpoint that I have. I'm not naive. There are people who are irredeemably sociopathic and bent on destruction. We need to deal with them somehow, but the 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 way we're legitimizing use of violence in some contexts and in others we don't, it's just problematic,
Well,
I think.
and when you bring that up, we have to bring up the fact that my country just decided to remove itself from the non-nuclear proliferation agreement.
Complete insanity. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I cannot explain my country anymore. It seems set on these things that bring us closer to war, and and in this case, what would be a devastating war, not just for us, but society as a whole.
Yeah. And
And
just to make, here I am with making you guys feel better of your respective countries by saying I don't understand my country either, and I just say it's kind of a global nervous breakdown in a way.
You should have Boris.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Boris, he would exactly like,
That's
you
we've
know,
reached our low point as well.
we got a
The low
Trump, I
point of
raise you a
history.
Boris, I raise you a Boris.
Yeah. Yeah.
oh my gosh, I was at an open mic today. I wish I could remember it, where somebody wrote a limerick about Boris and Trump, and it was quite good.
Oh, you got to
Oh.
find that and post that. That's good, yeah.
I saw but some of the made a badge that's with the two of them saying dumb and dumber, which I thought was quite good.
Well, if they could at least get their tongue stuck at a frozen telephone pole, then it would keep them busy. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's
You
just
know
sort
how
of
to get
unraveling.
Trump to lick a frozen pole?
I don't know.
Tell him he can't.
Tell him his tongue is too short.
Just
Uh,
tell him, yeah, just tell him anything.
Yeah, yeah,
Just tell him he can't, and he'll do it.
yeah.
but we need this comic relief of these by looking at these clowns, but we must never forget that there is a concerted effort of very disciplined, intelligent people
Crazy
behind these
people,
people. Exactly.
intelligent but crazy.
Exactly. And they are disciplined, and for them these clowns who are jumping around distracting everybody is a godsend. We need to keep our eyes on the ball and hold these guys to account. I mean,
One has the initials MM. Mm,
oh yeah.
yeah,
M.
MM. Mitch McConnell.
Oh yeah. Well, these people are I mean it's I don't know how they sleep at night, but I was also going to point out Mitch
Mm,
McConnell, obviously, but also Liz Cheney was about the nuclear proliferation when people were sort of criticizing that. She was putting out a tweet saying, yeah, oh you guys, oh can you please tell me when it's appropriate, like to strike back when they eradicate our city. So it's that rhetoric of like you're not you
let's
attack me,
see, us
I'm
versus
gonna wipe
them.
you out. Yeah, the us versus them
Right,
type of thing.
it's us versus them, and what we forget is there's only us.
Yeah,
Like we're all
exactly.
human.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. That
there's no them. We're all in this together. Hey, look who just showed up. North
ah North
Reisende.
Reisende. The sun
Hello,
is
guys.
hello, North Reisende.
It's Resende.
Oh, Resentee.
Resende.
Oh, I always pronounce it the German way because it's the people
Well,
who.
you're German.
That's maybe
Actually, no,
why.
I'm not.
No, no, not
Actually,
you. The guy who said he pronounced it the German way is German.
oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Reisende means the travelers, the people who travel.
yeah,
That's a cool name. Yeah, yeah, no, I love that
yeah,
name. So now we're in the of course given the realities, we're talking about this stuff. Is anybody up for Kafka because the world is not Kafkaesque enough? Let's get some real
I know, that's what I was thinking. Really, you cooked something so cheerful at this
exactly about
time,
ex
Drax. I
at
don't know.
I think at this time we just need to cheer up a little bit and read about a guy who's writing about turning into a bug and his own father wants to squash him underneath his boot.
Just before we do that,
Yeah.
uh, let's see. Just a spoonful of sugar
Sugar
and the
oh,
medicine
medicine
goes
go down.
down. The medicine goes down. Medicine goes down. Yeah. Okay, now we all feel better, so have at it.
Well, actually, I wanted to also start a new thing where I was going to ask people what they're reading, if they want to share what are they currently reading, whatever it is, articles, books, poems. So maybe that's starting a new tradition. Oh, somebody named by the name of Adam Thompson in the stream says Adam Thompson, Boris Bob, Boris Johnson, times Stormy's Vossi Bob. I'm not following, but Adam, please explain. So what are you guys reading, Daisy? What are you reading these days?
Well, I'm sort of between books and things. I've just finished Cloud Atlas,
Oh, wow, cool.
and I was also reading a children's book that I read, well, sort of read, possibly read when I was a kid and had forgotten about, and then I
Hmm.
suddenly stumbled across it again somewhere or other. I thought, oh my goodness, I remember this. So I read that by H.E. Todd. So that was another one that I've just finished. Um,
Hmm.
and there was something else. What else was there? I can't remember now.
And
You'll have
North,
to
could
think
you
good.
quickly, North, could you mute your mic because we got some feedback coming in, and
Yeah.
you can open it when you speak, of course. We always have a little bit these issues.
Oh yeah, the great course,
The
Audible. I'm listening to
the great
some great
cause.
courses. It was a thing on the philosophy of humour.
Oh, the great
That was
courses. Yeah, I always see
yeah,
that advertised in the
yeah,
Nation magazine. Ah, yeah, interesting.
quite interesting. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I'm enjoying them. So
Ah,
yeah, I just finished that one as well. So
cool.
I'm just sort of umming and ahhing now about what I start next.
The Cloud
I
Atlas is
probably
you enjoyed that? I mean, I think
yeah, I
that's
did.
kind of really good. I mean, it's a really
Yeah,
novel way of constructing, and it's very
it was
satisfying.
interesting.
Uh,
I'm not entirely sure I understand. Well, unfortunately, of course, I read it over. Oh, I don't know when I started reading it, but had to. I abandoned it and read the Grey House and Lotus Blue
oh boy.
in the middle of
Oh,
it. So unfortunately, it was a bit awkward coming back to it and finishing the last third
well, that
when I
is
was
tough. I mean,
already read.
children, if you're watching this, I don't recommend this
No,
because
I know it's not ideal
the,
by
the
any
the
means.
Cloud Atlas is structurally quite challenging. I mean, it's all
Yeah,
kind of it's very smooth in the end, and it's quite an amazing feat that the guy pulls off. But it's definitely you got to keep track of a lot of loose
I
ends
know.
there.
Well, there's a lot of. I think I forgot a lot of it, to be honest. I think I might have lost something because I lost the plot a bit, so to speak. Yeah, because I had such a huge
Yeah.
gap in the middle,
Well, it's fine. I mean,
which is
it
a bit of a
also, I
shame.
mean, yeah, but it's still, I feel I actually read, I finished Journey to the End of the Night, which is, I think, very important. It's from 1932 by a guy named Louis Ferdinand Céline, French guy, and there's a Doors song actually, and a lot of other sort of pop cultural references to this book, um, including Kurt Vonnegut, which I didn't know. Kurt Vonnegut always cites that book as a big inspiration to him. Joseph Heller from Catch 22. cites it as a huge inspiration. It is very comical. It is extremely modern. There's actually a character in there says, "Oh my God," several times, and it's from 1932. And I thought like, oh, interesting. But it's it's also really kind of depressing. I mean, the outlook on humans. It starts with the First World War. The main character gets drawn in there, and he sort of bounces around there. Then it's all sort of very um, by chance what's happening to him. It seems like he's kind of a passive guy, cynical but passive. And so then he goes to America, works in Detroit. He comes back to France, and people die. A lot of misfortune, a lot of bad people, and it just ends. It's just sort of the journey of life, but it's an incredibly nihilistic outlook in the end. Of course, Daisy, as you know, I enjoy these books. I find them ultimately positive because they,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't beat around the
Sounds
bush.
wonderful.
Uh, So, but it's one of those things that was challenging to read because of the prose. Despite what I just said with the modern language, it's still challenging. And then I lost track. And then later I found out that one of the main characters is actually the alter ego of the main character. So it's like his id or whatever, the guy who does all the
Yeah.
the bad stuff, but he's physically manifested as another character. And then I go
All
like,
right.
oh wow, I didn't notice that for 200 something pages. Um, and then you feel like, oh my God, am I dumb? And then you forget a lot. But what retains, and Daisy, this was with the Cloud Atlas. I couldn't summarize the plot for you if my life depended on it, but I know
No.
the
Well.
feeling it evokes. That's the great thing with literature.
Yeah.
The ultimately the feeling is strong. Yeah. So long diatribe.
Yeah.
Shyla, what
Yeah.
are you reading other than the Twitter timeline?
Well, yes, I do read the Twitter timeline, but
It's not good for
it's
your
not a
mental health.
book.
Hmm.
Not a book. I'm reading a New York Times bestseller, Just Kids by Patti Smith.
Ooh,
It's a National Book Award winner, Patti Smith, and she talks about her. Well, I won't go into it, but it's great.
about her life.
And again, reality. Yeah, she talks about her life. She was born in Chicago, so
Hmm.
I like that, and she's a wonderful writer, and I like that. And then, and then what I'm very excited to read, but it's not here yet, is I've just ordered a because you can't get it new anymore, but the used version of the complete poems by Emily Dickinson.
Oh, very nice. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so I can't wait for that to
Oh,
get
please,
here.
and when it comes in here, then you can read some for us here at the top of the hour. Welcome, Lee Motniak. Welcome, Lee Motniak, to the book club. This is the book club, and we communicate in voice, but you can please also put stuff in chat, and then we'll look at the chat, and we discuss things of writing and such, things that appear on the page. If
Hey, Mayeki.
if that tickles your fancy. Hi, Mayeki. Hello, Mayeki. And Northreisende, if Northreisende, you want to share with us what you're reading at the moment, other than depressing Facebook posts, maybe something uplifting.
I haven't really read anything lately, but there is one book I've been trying to find for years.
Hmm.
It was published in 1965.
Ooh.
It's based on the events that happened in central Saskatchewan. Um, it's called Flaming Prairie, and it was written
Oh.
by John F. Hayes. Um, Basically, he was more of a not young adult, teen fiction
Hmm.
writer.
John
So
F.
he would
Hayes,
take,
I'm looking at it. Yeah, Flaming Prairie, a story of the
yeah,
Northwest Rebellion of
yeah,
1885. Ah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So what he does, he created fictional characters, and he would incorporate them into the events that happened at that time, which would actually did happen.
Hmm.
And basically, the story revolves around a 17-year-old boy whose parents had passed, who were killed in a fire many years before, and he was sent to live with his uncle in Saskatchewan, and he was caught up in the events of that time with the rebellion, and and how he had to help the what then was the Northwest Mounted Police.
What was the
And
rebellion about? Did you know who was rebelling against whom?
well, what happened was the rebellion was in response to the federal government's um, push to settle the West,
Hmm.
and the Métis, which is what they're called, half breeds. They're half white, they're half or half Caucasian, half Aboriginal,
Hmm.
and many years before that, they settled in what was the Red River Valley, which is around Winnipeg, and a lot of them have lost their land, or their way of life, so they moved westward, thinking that where they settled in central Saskatchewan, they would actually be left alone, but that wasn't the case. um,
They were
the
persecuted there.
Well, they weren't really persecuted. It was just that the government was trying to entice immigrants from Europe, and in doing so, they were promising free land. Um,
Ah, this is
yeah,
so
free land.
fascinating. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'll let you speak, but the crazy thing here is I'm researching my own family history of my grandparents going to what is now Poland from Germany, and this is not a unique thing to any country. They were brought there. They were farmers, and the government wanted to bring them in there, the Germans, and gave them free land, and then pushed out the native Polish people at the time. But anyways, continue.
So the rebellion was as a result of that. It was quite violent, actually. It extended all the way from Regina to the south, all the way to the north around Prince Albert, and then all the way towards Edmonton. Um, the government did get what they want, um, but the Métis end up losing their battle, and many of them were sent to prison. Some of them were hung,
Mhm.
and a lot of them just picked up and left, and they went to BC,
Mhm.
and so they're now in northern BC now.
This is
Uh,
fascinating. I'm actually looking around here. This is really hard to find. This is nowhere to be found. Here's
no, I.
Toronto Public Library doesn't have it. Oh,
Mhm.
they actually do have. No, no, it's not available.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. What
I've been looking.
fascinates you about this particular
Well,
piece of history?
I got a hold of the book when I was what 13, 14 years old, and I lost it,
Yeah.
and I've never been able to find it. What fascinates me was that I love Canadian history, especially Western Canada, and how the explorers and the immigrants moved into the West, and how they settled the West,
Yeah.
and that's what really fascinates me. Um,
There's some really good stuff with historical fiction where fictional characters are interwoven with real history, and then the story unfolds. We've been talking at the book club here about
I
about
just wanna
James
say
Michener.
something
Yeah, go ahead.
about uh, res- pronounce your name again for me.
Resende.
Resende. I just want to say one thing. I think, although the book I'm very fond of is available, I know that feeling to read a book in adolescence
Yeah.
Hmm.
that is like a turning point. And for me, it was Silent Spring.
Silent Spring. Okay.
Okay.
Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I don't think I'll ever forget the book. And your coming here has actually inspired me maybe to give it another read. Not the
Yeah.
not the most upbeat book in the world, but I think it was the first time And maybe it is in adolescence that we really start to gain this global consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. I think if we're exposed to it, I think that's what's gonna impact our actions like throughout our life. I'm reading here Silent Spring is an environmental science book by Rachel Carson, documenting the adverse environmental effects caused by indiscriminate use of pesticides. And yeah, I think that what we read, this is the impressionable time where we form our convictions, I think, broadly speaking. I mean, we can re reverse them and augment them, but I think, yeah. I was gonna
There was a
say with,
book.
yeah, Daisy.
There was a book I read when I was a kid, and unfortunately I can't remember the title or anything, the author right off the top of my head, but it certainly made an impression on me. It was basically about post-nuclear scenario where just a couple of
Oh,
people had
chrysalids.
survived. Just a couple of people who survived and were living in this valley that was by some miracle untouched by all the radiation, except I think one of them was dying, and I think possibly did die in the end.
Was
But
it?
yeah, it was very powerful, very, very powerful.
Wait, North was
Uh,
saying you know the title maybe, or
Was it? Was it the chrysalids?
no, not the
ah,
Chrysalis.
the
No, no,
Chrysalis. That's a
no,
book
that
that
was,
follows us around
yeah,
here.
yeah.
I have
No,
two
that was
copies
that
in
was
the shelf.
excellent as well.
Yeah,
That was quite an impactful book as well. Yeah, I read that one as well. Well, I had to read that one actually for school. But
yeah.
no, it was a different one.
Actually,
But
I know what
yeah,
what North said was also really cool, in regard the less of the subject matter. When you have a book that you know you read as a child or as a young adult or whatever, and then that book disappears somehow, and then you try to hunt it down. That is actually that can be you can I can totally relate. I actually have a book that I kind of know where it is. When I moved to America, I brought it with me and then I left it in storage and now it's gone. It's
Oh wow.
yeah. Anyways, so yeah, good luck with this book. I brought it up here and we still don't have in Sansa the ability to bring this up on sort of a media screen. That would be interesting. So Flaming Prairie, very interesting. Silent Spring and Daisy can't remember the title. Um,
if you hang
But
on a
it's
minute, I can
interesting.
probably find it.
yeah.
It's
I'm sure
interesting
I've got it.
that Daisy's is post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Silent Spring is also, you know, talks about this will ruin the water and
Mm.
you know, you can never take it back.
And
So it's
North is
kind of
about a
apocalyptic.
rebellion of sort of forced resettlement or clearing native land for European immigrants. And you know what
That would
my
have
favorite in my
long,
book,
extensive effects.
I know what you're trying to say, Shally. You're saying like these things are sort of transformative. And my book, of course, is Conan the Barbarian, where a dude with enormous strength just makes his own way and has lots of relationships with beautiful women. But I digress. Where were we? Oh yeah, Kafka. That's right. Leah, would you like to chime in? Mayeki. Is Mayeki still here? Is he on the ground there?
Yeah, he's sitting down
Oh, I
there in
didn't see
front of
you,
the
Yeah, I'm
Mayeki.
box of
here.
stuff.
It's Zed for Zachariah.
What
Zed
is
for
it?
Zachariah by Robert O'Brien.
Z for Zechariah. Aha. Oh, they made this into a film as well
Oh, did they? Wow, I didn't know that.
in 2015.
Interesting.
Oh, in German it's das
I'll have to
letzte
have a look.
Kapitel der Menschheit. Cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that when I was a kid, although it was scary. I think it probably gave me nightmares.
So Z for Zechariah by Robert O'Brien. Post-apocalyptic science fiction, uh, published 1974 after the author's death. Anne Burton is a teenage girl who believes she's the last survivor of a nuclear war. Oh, my to read stack just got bigger again. Mayeki, would you like to chime in? Are you reading anything worthwhile these days? Mayeki has gone quiet. He's meditating. He's on a silent retreat. Hello?
You can take the
Hello?
fifth, Mayeki.
Yeah, you
There,
can
we
take
hear
the
Can
you
you
fifth.
now.
hear me?
We
Yes,
can hear you
we
now.
can hear you now.
Okay. No, I'm not reading anything at the moment.
It's good for your soul. It's healing.
I, but I'm building in Sansa.
Building is also good.
Yeah.
And both things would be the best, says Dr. Axter.
Yeah.
Leah, how about you? Would you like to chime in? Leah, you can take the fifth. I'll bring up the chat. And so I'm going to read a little Kafka for the rest of the hour. Franz Kafka,
I
pre-biograph.
was going to read a little Patti Smith, but okay.
That's too positive.
Well, I wanted to give people an idea of how she writes. That's all.
Okay,
I
you
was
can.
just going to read a couple of
No,
paragraphs.
please do. I mean, the theme today is Kafka, but we're all over the place anyways. Um, please, Shyla, yeah.
Okay. All right. This is how she opens the book.
What is the book about, by the way? Is it autobiography or a specific aspect of her life or whatever? Who is she?
Yeah, it's autobiographical,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about she goes into, and I'm not there yet, so I can't tell you about it. But one of the reasons I got the book is I was told it went into her adventures at Hotel Chelsea.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to get it. But this is how she opens it. When I was very young, my mother took me for walks in Humboldt Park, along the edge of the Prairie River. I have vague memories, like impressions on glass planes, of an old bolt house, a circular bandshell, an arched stone bridge. The narrows of the river emptied into a wide lagoon, and I saw upon its surface a singular miracle. A long, curving neck rose from a dress of white plumage. "Swan," my mother said, sensing my excitement. It pattered the bright water, flapping its wings, and lifted into the sky. The word alone hardly attested to its magnificence, nor conveyed the emotion it produced. The sight of it generated an urge I had no words for, a desire to speak of the swan, to say something of its whiteness, the explosive nature of its movement, and the slow beating of its wings.
Hmm. That's
It's the
awesome.
first three paragraphs of Just Kids by Patti Smith.
I read it's about her relationship with what's his name, Robert Mapplethorpe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, after this wonderful little
But part
reading,
of it happens at the Hotel Chelsea. Mapplethorpe was at the Hotel Chelsea.
the Hotel Chelsea, which is alive and well in Second Life.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody has yet to rebuild it in Sansar, and maybe nobody ever will,
Maybe.
or maybe somebody will.
Maybe.
So, Franz Kafka, folks, was born to a German-speaking a Jewish family in Prague, 1883 to 1924. And what's known about him is that he was very critical of his work and he wanted to have it all burned and destroyed. And his friend Max Brod, who had his manuscripts and everything, he didn't do that, and he published the stuff, and I think we're better for it. I'm a big Kafka fan. Kafka
He's a
writes,
perfectionist.
yeah, and actually, what I didn't know, and Erasmus Lyons, I didn't know a lot about his biography actually, and turns out his father was a very difficult and abusive guy, very dominating, and Kafka suffered a lot from that. And so his themes are authority, authoritarian regimes, and in popular culture, he is sort of his influence is can be felt absolutely everywhere. Maybe one of the best examples is the movie Brazil from Terry Gilliam, 1985, I believe, which creates this the atmosphere around a totalitarian state. So those are his themes. And we read the beginning of the Metamorphosis last time, which is a short story, which I think is absolutely incredible in pacing and use of metaphors. And it's about a guy who is sort of a traveling salesman, lives with his parents and his sister, and he wakes up one morning and he's transformed to a bug. And we are in chapter 2. The family has seen him. They opened the door. It was sort of a back and forth about opening that door. uh, they finally opened and they saw what happened to him, and now they're sort of in the state of denial. I mean, it's just quite brilliant. And his boss was there. He ran away, totally mortified. And the beginning of this book, this novel or novella, sorry, short story novella, was all about back and forth with the boss, trying to assure the boss, "Oh, I'm going to come to work. Don't worry about it. I just have sort of a temporary lapse of stuff going on." And sort of the way it's written is so sort of matter of fact in a way from Gregor Samsa's, who is the character, point of view, as as if he is has already made peace with the fact that he's now a bug. So let's see what transpires in chapter 2. And I won't get through the whole thing, so I'll stop towards the end of the hour. Um, Northreisende just offered me friendship. Yeah, I'm sorry, we haven't been friends. That's a lapse. I apologize. So here we go. We ended with the family slamming the door shut. So he's in his room. It was not until it was getting dark that evening that Gregor awoke from his deep and coma-like sleep. He would have woken soon afterwards anyway, even if he hadn't been disturbed, as he had enough sleep and felt fully rested. But he had the impression that some hurried steps and the sound of the door leading into the front room being carefully shut down had woken him. The light from the electric street lamps shone palely here and there onto the ceiling and tops of the furniture, but down below, where Gregor was, it was dark. He pushed himself over to the door, feeling his way clumsily with his antennae, of which he was now beginning to learn the value, in order to see what had been happening there. The whole of his left side seemed like one painfully stretched scar, and he limped badly on his 2 rows of legs. One of the legs had been badly injured in the events of that morning. It was nearly a miracle that only one of them had been and dragged along lifelessly. Oh, I should have said that his father pushed him. The father drove him back and sort of kicked him back into the room. It was only when he had reached the door that he realized what it actually was that had drawn him over to it. It was the smell of something to eat. By the door there was a dish filled with sweetened milk with little pieces of white bread floating in it. He was so pleased he almost laughed, as he was even hungrier than he had been that morning, and immediately dipped his head into the milk, nearly covering his eyes with it. But he soon drew his head back again in disappointment. Not only did the pain in his tender left side made it difficult to eat the food, he was only able to eat if his whole body worked together as a snuffling whole, but the milk did not taste at all nice. Milk like this was normally his favorite drink, and his sister had certainly left it there for him because of that. But he turned, almost against his own will, away from the dish and crawled back into the center of the room. Through the crack in the door, Gregor could see that the gas had been lit in the living room. His father, at this time, would normally be sat with his evening paper, reading it out in a loud voice to Gregor's mother, and sometimes to his sister, but there was now not a sound to be heard. Gregor's sister would often write and tell him about this reading, but maybe his father had lost the habit in recent times. It was so quiet all around, too, even though there must have been somebody in the flat. "What a quiet life it is the family lead," said Gregor to himself, and gazing into the darkness, felt a great pride that he was able to provide a life like that in such a nice home for his sister and parents. Oh, also for the folks who are just joining us, uh, Gregor is actually the only breadwinner. His father is not able to work. We don't really know why. Maybe he was laid off, but Gregor basically is the only breadwinner in the family. But what now, if all this peace and wealth and comfort should come to a horrible and frightening end? That was something that Gregor did not want to think about too much, so he started to move about, crawling up and down the room. Once during that long evening the door on one side of the room was opened very slightly and hurriedly closed again. Later on, the door on the other side did the same. It seemed that someone needed to enter the room, but thought better of it. Gregor went and waited immediately by the door, resolved either to bring the timorous visitor into the room in some way or at least to find out who it was. But the door was opened no more that night, and Gregor waited in vain. The previous morning, while the doors were locked, everyone had wanted to get in there to him. But now that he had opened up one of the doors and the other had clearly been unlocked sometime during the day, no one came, and the keys were in the other sides. It was not until late that night that the gas light in the living room was put out, and now it was easy to see that parents and sister had stayed awake all that time, as they all could be distinctly heard as they went away together on tiptoe. It was clear that no one would come into Gregor's room any more until morning. That gave him plenty of time to think undisturbed about how he would have to rearrange his life. For some reason, the tall, empty room where he was forced to remain made him feel uneasy as he lay there flat on the floor, even though he had been living in it for 5 years. Hardly aware of what he was doing, other than a slight feeling of shame, he hurried under the couch. It pressed down on his back a little, and he was no longer able to lift his head, but he nonetheless felt immediately at ease, and his only regret was that his body was too broad to get it all underneath. He spent the whole night there. Some of the time he passed in a light sleep, although he frequently woke from it in alarm because of his hunger, and some of the time was spent in worries and vague hopes which, however, always led to the same conclusion. For the time being he must remain calm. He must show patience and the greatest consideration so that his family could bear the unpleasantness that he, in his present condition, was forced to impose on them. Gregory soon had the opportunity to test the strength of his decisions as early as the next morning. Almost before the night had ended, his sister, nearly fully dressed, opened the door from the front room and looked anxiously in. She did not see him straight away, but when she did notice him under the couch, he had to be somewhere, for God's sake, he couldn't have flown away. She was so shocked that she lost control of herself and slammed the door shut again from the outside. But she seemed to regret her behavior as she opened the door again straight away and came in to tiptoe as if entering the room of someone seriously ill or even of a stranger. Gregor had pushed his head forward, right to the edge of the couch, and watched her. Would she notice that he had left the milk as it was, realize that it was not from any lack of hunger, and bring him some other food that was more suitable? If she didn't do it herself, he would rather go hungry than draw her attention to it, although he did feel a terrible urge to rush forward from under the couch, throw himself at his sister's feet, and beg her for something good to eat. However, his sister noticed the full dish immediately and looked at it, and the few drops of milk splashed around it with some surprise. She immediately picked it up, using a rag, not her bare hands, and carried it out. Gregor was extremely curious as to what she would bring in its place, imagining the wildest possibilities, but he never could have guessed what his sister, in her goodness, actually did bring. In order to test his taste, she brought him a whole selection of things, all spread out on an old newspaper. There were old, half-rotten vegetables, bones from the evening meal, covered in white sauce that had gone hard, a few raisins and almonds, some cheese that Gregor had declared inedible 2 days before, a dry roll, and some bread spread with butter and salt. As well as all that, she had poured some water into the dish, which had probably been permanently set aside for Gregor's use, and placed it beside them. Then, out of consideration for Gregor's feelings, as she knew that he would not eat in front of her, she hurried out again, and even turned the key in the lock so that Gregor would know he could make things as comfortable for himself as he liked. Gregor's little legs weird, at least he could eat. What's more, his injuries must already have completely healed, as he found no difficulty in moving. This amazed him, as more than a month earlier he had cut his finger slightly with a knife. He thought of how his finger had still hurt the day before yesterday. Am I less sensitive than I used to be then? He thought, and was already sucking greedily at the cheese, which had immediately, almost compellingly, attracted him much more than the other foods on the newspaper. Quickly, one after another, his eyes watering with pleasure, he consumed the cheese, the vegetables, and the sauce. The fresh foods, on the other hand, he didn't like at all, and even dragged the things he did want to eat a little away from them because he couldn't stand the smell. Long after he had finished eating and lay lethargic in the same place, his sister slowly turned the key in the lock as a sign to him that he should withdraw. He was immediately startled, although he had been half asleep, and he hurried back under the couch. But he needed great self-control to stay there, even for the short time that his sister was in the room, as eating so much food had rounded out his body a little, and he could hardly breathe in that narrow space. Half suffocating, he watched with bulging eyes as his sister unselfconsciously took a broom and swept up the leftovers, mixing them in with the food he had not even touched at all, as if it could not be used any more. She quickly dropped it all into a bin, closed it with its wooden lid, and carried everything out. She had hardly turned her back before Gregor came out again from under the couch and stretched himself. This was how Gregor received his food each day now. Once in the morning, while his parents and the maid were still asleep, and the second time after everyone had eaten their meal at midday, as his parents would sleep for a little while then as well, and Gregor's sister would send the maid away on some errand. Gregor's father and mother certainly did not want him to starve either, but perhaps it would have been more than they could stand to have any more experience of his feeding than being told about it. And perhaps his sister wanted to spare them what distress she would, as they were indeed suffering enough already. It was impossible for Gregor to find out what they had told the doctor and the locksmith that first morning to get them out of the flat. As nobody could understand him, nobody, not even his sister, thought that he could understand them, so he had to be content to hear his sister's sighs and appeals to the saints as she moved about his room. It was only later, when she had become a little bit more used to everything, there was of course no question of her ever becoming fully used to the situation, that Gregor would sometimes catch a friendly moment, or at least a comment that could be construed as friendly. "He's enjoyed his dinner today," she might say, when he had diligently cleared away all the food left for him, or if he left most of it, which slowly became more and more frequent, she would often say sadly, "Ah, now everything's just been left there again." Although Gregor wasn't able to hear any news directly, he did listen to much of what was said in the next rooms. And whenever he heard anyone speaking, he would scurry straight to the appropriate door and press his whole body against it. There was seldom any conversation, especially at first, that was not about him in some way, even if only in secret. For 2 whole days, all the talk at every mealtime was about what they should do now. But even between meals they spoke about the same subject, as there were always at least 2 members of the family at home. Nobody wanted to be at home by themselves, and it was out of the question to leave the flat entirely empty. And on the very first day the maid had fallen to her knees and begged Gregor's mother to let her go without delay. It was not very clear how much she knew of what had happened, but she left within a quarter of an hour, tearfully thanking Gregor's mother for her dismissal, as if she had done her an enormous service. She even swore emphatically not to tell anyone the slightest news about what had happened, even though no one had asked. Now Gregor's sister also had to help his mother with the cooking, although that was not so much bother as no one ate very much. Gregor often heard how one of them would unsuccessfully urge another to eat and receive no more answer than, "No thanks, I've had enough," or something similar. No one drank very much either. His sister would sometimes ask his father whether he would like a beer, hoping for the chance to go and fetch it herself. When his father then said nothing, she would add, so that he would not feel selfish, that she could send the housekeeper for it. But then his father would close the matter with a big loud "No," and no more would be said. Even before the first day had come to an end, his father had explained to Gregor's mother and sister what their finances and prospects were. Now and then he stood up from the table and took some receipt or document from the little cash box he had saved from his business when it had collapsed 5 years earlier. Gregor heard how he opened the complicated lock and then closed it again after he had taken the item he wanted. But what he heard his father say was some of the first good news that Gregor had heard since he had first been incarcerated in his room. He had thought that nothing at all remained from his father's business. At least he had never told him anything different, and Gregor had never asked him about it anyway. Their business misfortune had reduced the family to a state of total despair, and Gregor's only concern at that time had been to arrange things so that they could all forget about it as quickly as possible. So then he started working especially hard with a fiery vigor that raised him from a junior salesman to a traveling representative almost overnight, bringing with it the chance to earn money in quite different ways. Gregor converted his success at work straight into cash that he could lay on the table at home for the benefit of his astonished and delighted family. They had been good times and they had never come again, at least not with the same splendor, even though Gregor had later earned so much that he was in a position to bear the costs for the whole family, and did bear them. They had even got used to it, both Gregor and the family. They took the money with gratitude, and he was glad to provide it, although there was no longer much warm affection given in return. Gregor only remained close to his sister now. Unlike him, she was very fond of music and a gifted and expressive violinist. It was his secret plan to send her to the conservatory next year, even though it would cause great expense that would have to be made up for in some other way. During Gregor's short periods in town, conversation with his sister would often turn to the conservatory, but it was only ever mentioned as a lovely dream that could never be realized. Their parents did not like to hear this innocent talk, but Gregor thought about it quite hard and decided he would let them know what he planned with a grand announcement of it on Christmas Day. That was the sort of totally pointless thing that went through his mind in his present state, pressed upright against the door and listening. There were times when he simply became too tired to continue listening, when his head would fall wearily against the door and he would pull it up again with a start, as even the slightest noise he caused would be heard next door and they would all go silent. "What's that he's doing now?" his father would say after a while, clearly having gone over to the door, and only then would the interrupted conversation slowly be taken up again. When explaining things, his father repeated himself several times, partly because it was a long time since he had been occupied with these matters himself, and partly because Gregor's mother did not understand everything first time. From these repeated explanations, Gregor learned, to his pleasure, that despite all their misfortunes, there was still some money available from the old days. It was not a lot, but it had not been touched in the meantime, and some interest had accumulated. Besides that, they had not been using up all the money that Gregor had been bringing home every month, keeping only a little for himself, so that too had been accumulating. Behind the door, Gregor nodded with enthusiasm in his pleasure at this unexpected thrift and caution. He could actually have used the surplus money to reduce his father's debt to his boss, and the day when he could have freed himself from that job would have come much closer, but now it was certainly better the way his father had done things. This money, however, was certainly not enough to enable the family to live off the interest. It was enough to maintain them for perhaps 1 or 2 years, no more. That's to say, it was money that should not really be touched, but set aside for emergencies. Money to live on had to be earned. His father was healthy, but old, and lacking in self-confidence. During the 5 years that he had not been working, the first holiday in a life that had been full of strain and no success, he had put on a lot of weight and become very slow and clumsy. Would Gregor's elderly mother now have to go and earn money? She suffered from asthma, and it was a strain for her just to move about the home. Every other day would be spent struggling for breath on the sofa by the open window. Would his sister have to go and earn money? She was still a child of 17. Her life up until then had been very enviable, consisting of wearing nice clothes, sleeping late, helping out in the business, joining in with a few modest pleasures, and most of all, playing the violin. Whenever they began to talk of the need to earn money, Gregor would always first let go of the door and then throw himself onto the cool leather sofa next to it, as he became quite hot with shame and regret. He would often lie there the whole night through, not sleeping a wink, but scratching at the leather for hours on end. Or he might go to all the effort of pushing a chair to the window, climbing up onto the sill, and propped up in the chair, leaning onto the window to stare out of it. He had used to feel a great sense of freedom from doing this, but doing it now was obviously something more remembered than experienced, as what he actually saw in this way was becoming less distinct every day, even things that were quite near. He had used to curse the ever present view of the hospital across the street, but now he could not see it at all, and if he had not known that he lived in Charlottenstrasse, which was a quiet street despite being in the middle of the city, he could have thought that he was looking out the window at a barren waste, where the gray sky and the gray earth mingled inseparably. His observant sister only needed to notice the chair twice before she would always push it back to its exact position by the window after she had tidied up the room, and even left the inner pane of the window open from then on. If Gregor had only been able to speak to his sister and thank her for all that she had to do for him, it would have been easier for him to bear it. But as it was, it caused him pain. His sister naturally tried as far as possible to pretend there was nothing burdensome about it, and the longer it went on, of course, the better she was able to do so. But as time went by, Gregor was also able to see through it all much better. It had even become very unpleasant for him now whenever she entered the room. No sooner had she come in than she would quickly close the door as a precaution so that no one would have to suffer the view into Gregor's room. Then she would go straight to the window, pull it hurriedly almost open, almost as if she were suffocating. Even if it was cold, she would stay at the window, breathing deeply for a while. She would alarm Gregor twice a day with this running about and noise making. He would stay under the couch, shivering the whole while, knowing full well that she would certainly have liked to spare him this ordeal, but it was impossible for her to be in the same room with him with the windows closed. All right, folks, we have approached the top of the hour. This is so exceptional, and Daisy's analysis, or I mean, Daisy brought up last time the uh, you know that these metaphors can also be very much looked at under the lens of disability. And I had to think of you, Daisy, because you're not wrong at all. Actually, I mean, this passage here is all about how Gregor is imposing this burden on the family, right?
Yeah,
It's like he's not even thinking about like, oh my God, I'm screwed because I'm a bug. He goes like, I'm this burden. That's all about that this
yeah.
passage. Yeah. Amazing. I hope everybody's nicely depressed now. How about North? How are you feeling?
I just sense
Welcome
that,
to the book club.
yeah.
Where we exclusively only take very deeply depressing texts.
Dark. We're dark.
Um, well, this is not the first time I've been here, so
Good, good, good. No, no,
um,
yeah. No, go ahead.
um, I just have a sense of the family. Like there's a sense of not able to communicate with him.
Yeah,
So there's a lack of connectedness with Gregor and the family. There's nothing there.
exactly.
Uh,
And I think this is so universally applicable. It's like this coming of age story because he he gets transformed and then uh, yeah, like you said, there's a huge lack of communication. There's all these sort of unspoken things like now I forgot to mention the very beginning. It's clear that, like I said, he is the sole breadwinner because his father can't work or is not working, and his business collapsed. And now it turns out that they actually do have a little money set aside. So like all this pressure that is put upon him, or he puts on himself, is not as urgent as it was made out to be. It's sort of slowly revealed that the family is also quite manipulative, I think.
Well, I think the manipulation and even the silence, like when things are not said or not talked
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
that's all a form of communication.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it says such strong things, especially when it finally comes out.
Yep.
You
And
know,
the thing is, you ever heard the term that you wonder how these families operate? If you were a fly, you could actually see everything that goes on. Well,
Yeah.
there you go.
Oh,
Yeah, there
that's
you go.
good. Yeah, that's good because he is also a little bit of a fly. I mean, he's a bug. But also the um what I always find so interesting here uh in this sort of dysfunctional family setting is that they don't want to see anything, right? It's always about, this is mentioned like a million times in that short story, how the doors are being closed. The doors are closed. Everybody's sort of tiptoeing around the
Well,
issue. Nobody's
that's
saying
one of the
anything,
main
right?
that's one of the main reasons I think of disability, because disability is often shut away
Right,
historically. I mean,
right.
until when I was a kid in the 1970s, I mean, you never, it was a real event to see another person out in a wheelchair, because people just didn't go out if you had a disability.
Yeah,
You were locked
Yeah,
away in an institution or
right.
in an attic or somewhere.
and you
So,
know,
yeah.
there's also the other side of the coin there too. There's such a loneliness for the person that's disabled.
Yep,
Like there's hopelessness. You know,
yep,
they you know they there's nothing for them because they are locked away. Um,
yep. Exactly.
you know,
Exactly. What comes to mind nowadays, I told you this when I was in Edinburgh, visiting a Bremlin wolf. I was stayed at a bed and breakfast, and next to it was a building that had a disability advocacy agency in it, but it was an old building for deaf people, and it had in the stone it said Institute for the Deaf and the Dumb.
Yeah.
We had that in there
oh,
from like
are you
1850s,
serious?
deaf and the
Oh my
dumb.
god.
Well, because, I mean, they don't, you talk to them and they just go like, what? You gotta
Yeah.
be dumb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's funny because people say that they're dumb, but these people are very smart in a different realm. You know,
Yep.
you know, we just don't catch on it, or we're not willing to catch on it. You know,
No, because we're in an ableist society and and everybody needs to be this cog in the wheel, um, contributing. And if you can't contribute, then you're a burden. Am I right?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
okay.
Shell says, okay. Okay, so next week we'll conclude with this story, and then you guys can think about if we want to read something else, or we can be very format free and playful and reading little
May-
poems and talking about stuff that we're reading.
Maybe we could read something upbeat.
Ah,
Oh,
ah.
that would be lovely. That would be lovely.
From the Beat Generation.
You know, something that's not about death and destruction. I know what the road to death and destruction looks like. I live in the United States. I'm on it.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Well, considering what we heard yesterday afternoon and this morning.
yeah, we
Yeah.
hear it every day. Uh, absolutely. Let's do something. Let's do something funny. Uh, I mean, I love Kurt Vonnegut. I have Welcome to the Monkey House, which is a short story collection. No, wait, that's not the short story collection. That's a good one. But yeah, think about stuff, and we'll conclude this one. and then we'll do some funny stuff. I'm gonna end with the quote from Kafka, which I said to Daisy last week. I think we ought to read only the kind of books that wound or stab us. If the book we're reading doesn't
No.
wake us up with a blow in the head, what are we reading it
No.
for? That's what he said. So,
No, I don't
good
agree.
night, children.
Oh no.
No, we're gonna change the tone. We're gonna do something funny, uplifting. We need comic relief.
Little Mary want a bedtime story?
Wait, this quote goes up like this quote. So what will make us happy as you write, good Lord? We would be happy precisely if we had no books, and the kind of books that make us happy are the kind that could write themselves if we had to. But we need books that affect us like a disaster, that grieve us like the death of someone, like being banished into forests like a suicide. A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. I mean, I know what he means. I mean, but of course, yeah.
Yeah, but not all the books.
I'm gonna say too that maybe he's a perfectionist a little bit.
Uh, well,
Eh,
he was troubled because he was himself in this dysfunctional family with an abusive
yeah.
father, and um, this guy who does what is it called? The thug?
Snake charming.
No, thug notes. Thug notes. I
Thug
put it.
notes. Okay.
Yeah, this is a guy. He's hilarious. He does summaries of books and sort of like he looks like a thug with a bandana and a huge gold chain, and he's like, "Hey, what's up, guys? It's Kafka, dude." But it's really good. It's hilarious. Okay, that concludes the book club. Thank you for coming and thank you for joining me. This is really awesome. I love it, North, that you were able to stop by again. It's awesome to have our small circle of people who can appreciate stuff that's written on the page. Mayeki, please
And
continue
I wanna
building.
I wanna thank you, Drax, for the mispronouncing North's name. So now I will never remember what the proper pronunciation
Well,
is,
you
but
know what
that's okay.
the most depressing thing for me is you've seen the this movie called The Downfall about the last days of the Nazi regime. It's a German movie. I think it
Yes.
won a bunch of Academy Awards, but it also
Yes.
has this whole it spawned this whole meme thing on YouTube.
Oh
Where like
no.
have you not seen this? This is hilarious. Where he's in the bunker like Hitler describes this and that, and there's one Hitler talks about Second Life. It's hilarious. So he's like in there,
No.
and what he's actually, what he's talking about is like, oh, we're losing the war. What's happening with these guys over there? Oh, they lost that battle. And then there are subtitles that says, we are losing Sims. What's happening? Why is the lag so big? Oh my God, Philip shouldn't have open sourced it. And the problem for me is I can't fully enjoy it because I always, I have to turn the sound down. But for somebody who doesn't speak German, it's awesome. You just hear, and then you read the subtitles. Why is the Linden dollar not doing well? Well, mein Führer, we sold the assets on Zindra, and then we sold the mainland assets, but the lag is killing us. Um, and then there's one thing. Okay, see, this is the comic relief that just you look on it on YouTube. You'll roll around on the floor laughing. Last thing I'm going to say is there's one in that scene. It's always the same scene. It's like the last sort of strategic meeting in the bunker, and there's all these people in the bunker, and then there's one scene where Hitler says, everybody who is not involved with this leave the bunker. So only like his core, like 5 people, remain in the bunker. And in the Second Life one, the subtitles say, "Everybody that is not role playing as a furry, leave the bunker." And then, it is so good.
Oh, brother.
All right,
Maybe I should reopen my reading on Philip Pullman.
Philip Pullman,
His dark
yes, his
his
Dark
dark
Materials,
materials
yes.
because uh, I was in the cinema. I was reading the first book, and I was in the cinema and seeing the movie
Mm-hmm.
with Kidman and Craig and all those great actors. Uh, but I then the next two books they didn't come out on movie because they were afraid that was something connected with the Arab world, and they were afraid they would make hysteria out of it.
Mm.
But now I see that I think it's HBO. They started as the book series as a series on TV,
Hmm. Well,
and I
that
would like to see that, see how it commences.
actually Philip
It's
Pullman
similar.
is on the top of my list. I haven't read it, but I have tremendous respect for the man, and I'm actually good that you mentioned this, Mayeki. This is one person that I want to approach through his agent to come for an interview here. I'm approaching a bunch of high-level people, including Stephen King. So keep your fingers crossed. Who knows? You know,
Oh,
it's a crap. You
wow.
know, you can't. You know, the worst thing that can happen is that nobody responds, but I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna say, "Hey, Steven, big fan. We're doing an interview show in VR. Do you want? We can make an avatar. Blah blah blah. Let's do this." And who knows? You know, some people, some very well-known people, are often really kind of game for this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Sometimes their agents say, "No, you can't do that," and then they say, "No, I want to do it." So, you know, maybe
It was interesting.
Daisy, you could give Patrick Stewart a call. That'd be good. Do you have his number? So, North,
I'm
you
not
were
sure
saying.
he's written any books, has he? I don't
It
know.
doesn't matter, but he reads, so he is an
Oh, I'm sure he
exception.
reads, yeah.
It was actually really nice to see those two actors come in yesterday.
Yeah, yeah, the guys who played the Klingons was cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They were great. I mean, it was this stuff is pretty awesome. Of course, they're constrained. You know, this is something where I know that they would talk longer. Um, if you get them into a conversation, like I don't know, you weren't there with the guy from Marvel was there, and they had no time restraints. They were really engaging, and we talked a lot about this and that, and about movies and books and stuff. And that's always something that I find like, oh, you know, I know that these celebrity guests would probably spend more time, but then their agent is probably standing next to them and said, no, 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 we gotta go. Or sometimes it's a little bit self-restraining from maybe Lynn and I's point of view that I completely understand that they think like we can't keep them longer. But those, especially those two Klingon guys who appeared as robots, uh, th- it really felt like they were there. We were just getting started, right? We were really kind of getting into a good conversation.
yeah.
Yeah. There's some stuff now coming up.
I
Yeah.
got so it's those damn agents all the time.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
the
I mean, my personal experience really is I can tell you a lot of stories about approaching people for interviews or even some guest appearances. I did a music video 20 years ago where I approached a high-profile German actor through the agency and they declined. And then a friend of mine gave me his phone number and I called him and he said, "Yeah, sure. When do you want to do this?" So that's what these agents are paid for to kind of, you know,
yeah, they're blockers.
they're
Well,
blockers.
they're at a convention, aren't they?
They're at a convention,
They're
yeah.
probably there for several. They might be there for several days, but they've probably got, you know,
Yeah, yeah, the
things
convention
lined
is
up
absolutely. They got the stuff
throughout the
lined up. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
convention.
Yeah,
So they're
absolutely.
probably something. I mean, from the convention point of view, they're when they're in VR here, they're not really there almost. So they still. It seems odd actually that they do it in the middle of the convention
No, you're right,
because it's sort of
absolutely. And
taking them away from the convention almost. You know, they
yes,
could do it any time really.
that's a very good point. In the convention, it that's a good point. And they do, if you look actually at their Twitter timeline that's like 5 minutes. I just looked yesterday, 5 minutes before they appeared here, they were on the big stage. So they have all these
Yeah, exactly. That
responsibilities.
they'd be elsewhere. I mean, at a Star Trek, I think some of them can be really big. These
Yeah.
Star Trek
Oh,
conventions,
this is
like
if
probably.
you this is huge. There's, I don't know,
Yeah, so
several
they'd be on
thousands of
stage
people.
and start having huge autograph queues and all that sort of thing. So we're probably quite lucky, really, I would think, to get any time at all, at an actual convention.
Yeah, yeah. I
It
know that.
seems,
Well, Galileo did
yeah,
send me a private message, and he is absolutely right. He said, Drax, please keep your questions short. But I mean, I'm
yeah,
just compulsive in the sense to if I get a feeling that somebody is a guest, maybe, uncomfortable, I know how to break the ice, and I don't, it's not a egotistical thing or anything. It's like I need to, this is very compulsive for me, where I go like, oh, this, I need to break the ice to get the thing flowing. So I always feel like I got to do that for whatever reason. But so, no, Galileo is cool, and he said like, no offense, but please do shut up. And I get like, that's cool, no problem.
Yeah, yeah. So he's obviously watched some of your prior interviews and
No, no, no. I mean, this is just a matter. I mean, he is running this thing. I mean, that's totally cool with me. I'm not hired to do this. I'm actually hired to film, so I'm the backup guy. I had these two questions that I threw out there. Also found it interesting that the question that Luvo asked, which is a good question. She asked it to everyone if they can see themselves acting in here, and yeah.
Oh, talking about acting. I don't know if some of you guys may know me in Second Life as the same name under the same name, North Resendy.
Oh,
Um, every yeah, I'm in the children's community, so I know
oh, that's
you know I
right.
know
Yes.
yeah I know Loki and Gemini and some other people. But every Saturday night I play Dungeons and Dragons, and
Oh,
yeah,
in
so
SL?
well, in Second Life, yeah,
What, that
we
is cool.
there's five of us that get together, and
mm,
we've been playing. Well, I've been playing D&D since spring of 2017 or 18. Sorry, 18. So yeah, so over almost a year and a half.
Wow, that is cool. Please send me a
Yeah.
private message because that might be something for the destination guide.
hmm
Actually, I should cut the stream now.
Well, we actually do this privately. We don't actually have
Ah,
a public place we do it.
okay.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. I mean, I have talked to John, who's my dungeon master. Him and I both started together.
All right, folks, I'm cutting the stream as we're going into private conversations. See you next time.